first time I've ever been late.
Yeah,
That's
it's
pretty
noted,
good.
you're usually very early. But we can start late, just can't start early.
Oh, yeah, we can. Sorry, Ron.
No problem.
Morning.
I
All right, you ready?
find myself in similar situations more often than you,
Well,
so don't worry about
let's
it.
call the meeting to order. Roll call for a quorum,
I'm here.
You're both here.
both here.
I know we adopt the agenda.
Where did the stack of agendas
Yes,
go?
I'll second that.
It was on the table.
I think he's got more than that.
Oh,
Acclamation.
oh, okay. There's, here you can, there's just one. Here you go.
Okay, got a motion to approve the agenda, got a second, all those in favor say aye. Old business, code of conduct, code of ethics. And I think we had, several ones here to look through as a guideline, I guess.
I have some questions, Mr. Chairman, if you could.
Go ahead, Mr. Brady.
I left them out in the truck. But anyway, I can remember them. I guess what we need to figure out before we get too far into the tall grass is what we're trying to accomplish. And then who would this apply to? And then how would we enforce it? I guess those are the types of questions that I think we need to answer before we go spend a lot of time on it, either with the board. So that's my thing. If as Mr. Goff said, in the last meeting that we had, I guess the board meeting, and then this meeting too, if it's just aspirational, then what good is it? And if it's something that we're gonna enforce, how to enforce it, because I don't think it should be something that we, make a county code amendment where it's a violation is a misdemeanor. So again, I'm back to the question I keep asking myself, and other people ask me, and it's hard to answer a question I don't know the answer to. What are we trying to correct here, and who's it apply to? So does it apply to just the board and its employees? Does it apply to every agency in the county? If it doesn't, does that mean those appointed by the circuit court judge, which would be the electoral board as well as the BZA? The authorities that this board created, we've got the Park and Rec Board, we've got the Water and Sewer Authority. Does it apply to them as well? Everybody in the county that gets a paycheck gets something from the general fund, no matter who they're appointed by.
Well, as to enforcement, do you want me to try to answer one
Well,
of those questions?
I think there's something that the chairman and I need to have an answer to. I don't know how he feels about it. I'm just sharing my questions.
In the version that was provided by Steve and Al, what I call the Madison County version, there are consequences for the violation. You can be removed from like a chairmanship. You can be removed from membership on a board that if you're appointed by the Board of Supervisors.
But we have
So
the general laws of the Commonwealth apply to that, 14.2.
they do, and the Code of Conduct simply reiterates that. I did draft, and I don't know if Mr. Curry got it to you.
Yeah.
But I did draft the language that would remove the misdemeanor penalty from that particular section. And as we discussed last, there's two ways to do it. One is to make it outside the code as kind of a preamble or a separate section that's not contained in it. But it seems to me to be just as easy and maybe a little bit more rational to simply not punish it as a misdemeanor, violations thereof. There is a Virginia code section that allows the board to basically fine its own members for violations of this sort of thing. But Mr. Curry and I discussed that, and they're like, well, why do we, it's right there. It says you can do it. Does it have to be enacted as an ordinance? My opinion was it did, because it's the 15.2 self-executing with regard to the board. So, but there is a section in the Madison County thing that deals with what consequence there may be for violation of the Code of Ethics, which is a little narrower than the general. You could remove somebody from a board because of something that's not a violation of the ethics. They had a stroke and they can't function, for instance. But the violation of the code of ethics, you could also then say, well, hey, you violated, subsection D of the code of ethics, and therefore we're going to remove you. Gives you something to put, hang your hat on.
So
as
there's-
a removal.
All the things that we've written, there's no path to enforce it.
Well,
Well, a majority vote.
which one is this? It was the last one on
So-
attached to board
Right,
docs.
so that document is,
No,
best
what I'm
I can
saying is
understand.
There's no path to enforce it, there's no, it's just, what happens, we just, 5 board members gather around a table and we say, hey, so-and-so did this, there's nothing in this, if this is supposed to be the document we follow, there's nothing in this that gives anybody that, whether it's an employee or whether it's one of the board members, and again, we don't know how far it reaches out, there's nothing that establishes what the process is so that you have due process.
Well, there is in the version that I sent along, there's a duty to report to the chairman.
Right.
Yeah, so if somebody observes a violation, let's say, of a member of the library board, okay, just as, I'm not picking on them, I'm just using that as an example. There's a duty to report that to the chair. And then the chair, presumably, it's not spelled out, presumably would take whatever action to place it on the board's agenda for an action item. And it would just be added to the agenda for
So
some
again,
kind of
there's
action.
no process for due process.
Well, I think that due process.
If you've got, right, you think, but the problem is, what do we do? If we were to recommend to adopt something, excuse me, allergies, but if we were to recommend to adopt something and there's no process for due process, then you basically could have a witch hunt and a member or an employee would get hammered on, and there's no way to protect themselves.
I think a majority of the board has to vote to impose whatever sanction you have, so that if the board
But
had
there's nothing spelled out in the process. We have a meeting on Monday, and this thing is so far away from being a discussion and action item on the agenda that we don't need, presumably. We need to know. Whichever side you have on the fiasco that y'all orchestrated it, by the way, about the thing with the BZA member. There was no due process there. It was
well, that's
all,
what we're trying to correct.
no, this still doesn't correct it. It was all accusation on one side, and the board had no process to bring an individual in front of them and say,
Right.
did this happen?
That's what
And
we're
years
trying to
ago
correct by this.
with the planning commission, and Roger was on the board at the same time, both of us were on there, we had some errant planning commission members, and we brought them in a closed meeting, and we sat down and discussed the grievances that we had with some of their actions. So we had a process there.
Well, I don't know
we
that that's
didn't have a
spelled out
process.
in what we drafted, but what it did say was
There is
that
no process.
certainly the board could establish that process in each case. In other words, you're going to have, say if you have a violation, you bring it before the board, you put it on the agenda. The board would have to, by a majority vote to impose that sanction. In doing that, you could bring the guy in, you could ask him questions, you let him defend himself. So that process would exist. Now, I don't know that we need to spell that out.
Well, I think
in
we
this
do
code.
because it was.
You could certainly do that, I guess.
It keeps it from being, because what y'all orchestrated 2-3 months ago could happen to anybody, and some of y'all have been involved in those same type of behavior.
No, this applies to, on your other question, the way we had interpreted it, or anticipated initially, is that the board would enact it presumably for everybody that the board has some jurisdiction over.
Well, we
In other words,
haven't,
anybody-
we haven't,
And then the other
figured out
people,
what
the
that is.
BZA and whoever else it might be that the board didn't have supervision over, would adopt the same code, that's what we were hoping for, so that the thing would apply to everybody in the county who's elected, appointed, or employed. So basically, you've got the same set of rules for everybody. And in terms of the public would then have a fairly succinct document that would spell out what the code of conduct is. You wouldn't have to dig through that book to find this, that, or the other thing. It's all in one place, basically, to give the population, the citizens of the county, some idea of what people are expected to do and what the sanctions are if you don't do it.
There is a
it's all
provision.
about behavior.
Can I make a comment or a question? Again, I still want to know which one's which.
So the Madison document was provided
That's the last
by
one.
these guys
Well, that wasn't exactly Madison. We changed
with
it around.
art, and it modified. So what happened with this document is the format was just changed to be codified in
Okay,
30.
that's what I thought it was.
And there's also the non-misdemeanor language.
Right, so in that, to answer Ron's question, there is a section on enforcement. All
Right.
But his issue about due process, I think you can't have it separately, because if you're gonna put this in your code, I mean,
You
my
can't-
question is, this theoretically doesn't say what due process is, so theoretically, you could make an argument that your code is violating the 14th Amendment.
Well, I don't know about that, but I can say that in 15.2, there's another section that deals with the power of a board to conduct investigations and issue subpoenas.
Right.
And so if that were to be an issue, then I think that reference to that code section would probably take care of the due process, because it's spelled out by the Code of Virginia. So if we adopt the Code of Virginia's so-called due process section for an investigation and conduct of a hearing, and you know, the ordinary, what you would think of as process type of commandments, then I think that we're not going to be violating the 14th Amendment.
Okay, that's exactly what I was.
But the code section, if I remember correctly, says may, they may do it.
You may, and so
But
that
if you don't do it,
implies,
and if you may be able to do something like this to an appointed official or an elected official, but if you, appointed, if it's an employee, if you don't have some sort of a process that they could follow, like a grievance policy, the county's gonna find itself in a
Yeah, so you don't have a
And that would be
grievance.
covered by the code, by the Virginia code.
it would-
No,
We
what-
did say
no.
at the beginning of this, the one we drafted, that this needs to be consistent with the Virginia code, with any federal statute, with the Constitution, anything else. So, as Art says, if there is something in the code that would provide that due process or whatever else you need, you would simply apply
I
it.
think
You know,
Ron's
I-
point is just make it a shall reference. You shall do what 50, not take out the may.
And we're not wedded to this language. Basically, what we wanted is
It's the
something
same,
that
it's
works.
the same thing with the credit card fiasco. Same thing with the credit card fiasco. Fauquier County, they have shall in theirs. Ours says may.
Well, change it to shall, that's easy enough. You know, as I say, this language is not wedded in stone. We are.
Well, no, it's not
basically-
waiting it's not to this board approve something.
Right, of course, but what we're recommending is simply that a code that works be enacted. However, that, and we, I guess,
Right.
when we provided something to Art, said go through this and make sure that it's consistent with what the county wants, and if there's still changes that need to be made, fine, make them. That's
There's
okay.
no problem in adding a section to the compliance and enforcement paragraph that says that upon the chair receiving the complaint as outlined in subparagraph, whatever it is, that the chair shall cause it to be placed upon the agenda, and the clerk of the board shall issue notice to appear to whoever may be the subject of the investigation at a date and time certain, either a special meeting or regular meeting, in open session or closed session, and have, kind of a form notice of appearance short of a subpoena that would allow a person to come in to answer to the allegations. Of course, the document itself is going to have to say what it is that they're supposedly violating in order to give them fair notice on how.
Without these safeguards in there, any time a board hasn't, gets aggravated at any one party, they can have a witch hunt with no ability for that individual to.
That's politics, eh?
We don't need to create anything.
No, let me give a different example. I just went through an issue with the electoral board doing the same thing. They are now going to withdraw it, all right? But the point is, they did not do due process in what they sent me, all right? So the point, that comes back to the other point of who does this apply to, all right?
Well, I think that's an easy answer. The only thing that this can apply to is those employees and officers that are creatures of the Board of Supervisors. It doesn't apply to constitutional officers, I can tell you that right now. And it's not going to apply to people who are appointed by the circuit court, like the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Electoral Board. It's only going to apply to those people who answer essentially to the board, over whom the board has hiring and firing power.
But those other boards could adopt the same language.
They may, Yes,
If
they
they
certainly
want to,
could,
right.
yeah, but they would have to take a vote.
And we would
Right.
ask them to do that.
Yeah, and you would ask them to do that. I'm just saying, but just to be clear,
Right.
that I don't see.
So that was our understanding.
Yeah, that there's any way that you're going to have, like this, you know, you're not gonna haul Sharon Dodson in as Commissioner of Revenue, to answer to.
Or her subordinates.
Or her subordinates, because they're separate constitutional entities. And, for that matter, the sheriff and her deputies. That is true as well.
Yeah, appreciate that.
So that actually limits the number of people it directly applies to quite a bit.
It does. It's gonna apply to the library board, it's gonna apply to the, and it's not gonna apply to the water and sewer.
They'll apply to the fire levy board.
Anybody you all appoint, and the planning commission.
We have a lot of boards and commissions.
Yeah.
So all of those,
Right.
just not the two authorities and not the BZA, not the registrar, or the.
Well, does it or does it not apply to people as you appoint? Does it or does it not apply to people on boards who the DOS
Well,
appoints?
that's what we need.
That's what he just said. It
That's,
only
it
applies
would
to-
apply to
It
them.
would.
They would, yeah.
Because
So it would
they-
apply to the water and sewer board.
No,
No.
because they're separate.
They're
They're
actually-
authority.
Even though those people are appointed by the board.
Well, I think they're appointed by terms, and there's a code section, just like the BZA. There has to be, you know, a malfeasance in office, et cetera, et cetera. And for good cause shown, the judge can remove the BZA people. I don't think that the board, well,
You have to, I guess you'd have to
you know,
research that.
on the you're talking about the Recreational Facilities Authority and the Water and Sewer Board.
They're actually different political.
My thought was that the Water and Sewer Board, for some reason, statutorily
Well,
insulated.
they're a creature of the state, aren't they? Aren't they a creature
No.
of the state authority?
No, I think there's,
We're gonna look it up.
yeah, we can check on
I
that.
thought the state
They
required
were
every county to have
creatures
a
of,
water and
because
sewer board.
the board had to.
Yeah, the board had to do that.
Re-adopt something, before Peter, I don't know what year it was, but he worked with them and I think their bylaws were like 30 years out of date probably. Kind of like a zoning ordinance, but, and the board had to, adopt it.
But yeah, if the question is, who does it apply to, you know, we could be quite specific, you just put a list in the thing. You know, this applies to the members of the board, this applies to county
Absolutely.
staff, the county administrator, the administrator's assistants, the county attorney, applies to, the planning commission, all the members of the library board, all, you know, we just go through and put.
With your dual hats, which one is Pat under it or not?
Pat is actually comp board, and I hire and fire,
Okay,
comp attorney.
that's what I'm saying, you gotta be specific so they know.
So, she's kind enough to assist with the county stuff, but that's just because of tradition.
So it wouldn't actually apply to you, would it?
Only as the county attorney,
Right, but not as the
but not as the Commonwealth's attorney. I've got a whole other,
And the board can hire and fire his services from the county attorney.
that's right. Yeah. So, because, you know, it's an employment at will thing, just same as Mr. Curry or Warren or.
As I say, what we would urge is that then those other boards that this doesn't actually apply to subsequently adopt the same language on their own, so that you have the same standard for everybody that works in the county.
But I think as long as you all understand that the power of the board only goes so
Oh, I
far as to
understand that,
say
yeah,
that
right.
we've adopted it because we think it's great, we hope you do too, but we can't force you.
Well, that's very true,
Yeah.
but ask them to do that.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, we may actually start lobbying the other groups to get them to do it.
Sure.
Well, but the enforcement section would be presumed then to be linked to that group.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
that
And it
constitutional
might be,
officer.
Oh,
it may
yeah.
have some, it may be consistent with what the statutes call for them to do, that's all.
And they could voluntarily say, you know, they're going to subscribe to the.
Yeah, they could reference it and just change the enforcement
Yeah,
mechanism.
because I mean, really,
Well, the sheriff doesn't have to worry about bringing somebody before any group to consider whether they violated. She can just say,
Do
thank
it
you
as a
very much for
supervisor."
your service, leave your badge on my desk.
that's what happens.
Well, that's with all the constitutional officers, but I guess she has the most turnover or potential for the most turnover, she has the largest group of people.
And this doesn't affect the school board.
But I really think the discussion of enforcement compliance is the exception.
No, it's the
We
key.
would all,
It's
well,
the
I
key.
understand it's critical, but I would suggest that, and hope, that we never use it. And that really what we want to do as a community, what I would want to do for my community, is to have that expression expression of what is important to us as leaders and how we're gonna operate in a manner and wording that people understand.
Well, I think
And-
it's also good that you put in that they have to sign acknowledgement of it.
Well, and that
That's
wouldn't
very good.
happen if it were part of the code, because
Right,
they
right.
do that, that's just, code is the code. But if it were
Right.
outside of the code, you could have an acknowledgement. But, I don't view this as a gotcha sort of thing, hey, this is more of a, we're committing to do these things. We all agree this is how we want to operate our life, and those books up there say this is what we're supposed to do for the most part. But, it's just, we need to think about this every once in a
Okay, so
while, and
that-
here
that-
is
that
today
goes
and
to
now
some
we're
of my
thinking
first
about it.
questions, what are we trying to fix? And
And maybe the biggest thing you're trying to fix is messaging to the community, whereas that's lost sometimes. You as a political preacher know the rules and the law to the great extent for COIA and these things like that. There have been slips in the past,
And the reverse
but
of
everybody
that-
doesn't.
The reverse of that true. These are signatures that people, petitions that people have asked that you do this, not with a specific language, but in general that you have such a code, so that it, as you say, it also provides the community with the knowledge that the people that are working for the taxpayers, are working for them, in fact, as the code says. So it's going to work both ways.
Yeah, well, and I would hope that the community, those who put signatures on paper or otherwise think it's important because that's the kind of community you want to be in, that our elected and appointed representatives follow these standards, not because I'm going to be checking every day and as soon as you slip up, I'm going to go to paragraph 15 and we're going to get you.
I'm afraid I think that's the root of what is being presented. I really do. I think that's exactly that's what's being presented to me by the public. The public saying, what is that group up to? And I say, I don't really know.
Yeah. Well, that's,
All we want to do is just engender goodwill, civility, and high ethical behavior on the part
That's
of
basically good government.
our
That's what we want.
government employees and elected officers, that's all. It's a positive spin, Ron. It's not,
Well,
this is
that's-
not something to set up, in my view.
I've been trying to do that for a long time.
this is a great opportunity.
Yeah.
If
'Cause
you-
you may not be here forever.
Well, I don't
As
Yeah,
much
I mean,
as,
You never
but,
know.
your replacement might.
You never
you
know
know,
what's
we're
going to
gonna
happen
have longer
next
than
year.
it
I mean,
should have been.
if you have it in place, when something goes awry next year, then you've got the thing there. You don't have to go back and try to figure out what you're going to do about it. I mean, it is projective
But
for the future as much as
all of
anything
this is based on personalities working together to enact this and to enforce it. What changes that?
That, I think the answer to his question is to put in a shall on the investigation requirement. Because that's where it went wrong.
You can definitely put a more direct link of the
But make it a shall, not a may.
right. So as in the codified version, if you go
Because
to-
I'm not gonna get into specifics, but I know something about what Paige was talking about with the thing with the electoral board, and they basically violated the due process. They got a complaint,
Yeah,
they won't say who it is, they sent out this letter, and it's just, it's bad.
Yeah, and I think in this case, this wouldn't impact that. But the paragraph P in the codified version could be modified however you want to be as prescriptive as you recommend, and the board ultimately
Well, I recommended
accepts.
shall on the credit card thing, and I got voted down. We have a may. If somebody violates our credit card policy, the board may do something.
If I may just say something in support of what Mr. Frazier is urging, I think that as to the identification of those to whom this applies, as to a provision in there about due process, they both go to the same beneficial, I think, effect, which is to provide definiteness and predictability to this, which would be adopted by the board. And I think that that is consistent with the spirit of the code of conduct, which is, exemplifies good practice, good behavior, fair behavior. And I think that your 2 points as to identifying, as Mr. Curry suggested, by board, by compartment, by type of job to whom it applies is a very good idea, and it avoids a future confusion about does this apply to me or not. And secondly, I think that putting in a due process provision is a very good idea. And as wordsmithing, but
Well, that's scattered all over the place there. I think we're gonna have to do a draft of this, but also too, we gotta remember one fundamental point here. Not everything that the board did, or like with the letter to Mr. Connick, I'm not so sure due process was implicated because there was no life, liberty, or property.
There's
But
really,
that was-
there's no consequence.
But
It's
still,
just a
still to
notice.
Mr. Frazier's point, I mean, the spirit of this
Oh, yeah.
is good government.
Yeah.
And part of good government is notice and opportunity to be heard. And it's a fundamental principle of American democracy. And
There
I,
you go.
Yeah, and if you use the
I support
BZA
it.
example, as I think you said that in the meeting, if I recall correctly, that you didn't approve of what he did, but we have no basis to do this. This would give you a basis to do it. In other words,
Still
If,
with
this
Well, not
if
for
the
the
judge
BZA.
this
accepted,
gives you
if the
something
judge
to hang your
accepted
hat
it.
on if you
Yeah.
read about the letter.
Right. Or the
You can
BZA
say,
accepted it
this is
for themselves.
consistent with what we had adopted
I think
last year.
Yeah, well, I think they could,
Well,
they
to
could
Mr.
adopt the rules. of
to
procedure.
Mr. Frazier's point, the bird's got two wings. One is, what is the standard? And the second is, how is that standard applied to an individual who needs the opportunity to be heard?
Well, with a Republican form of government, it's not the, it shouldn't be the objective, it should be the requirement that the majority protect the rights of the minority. And if it's a minority of one or a minority of two, I think whoever is the majority, they have to look at that. How's this gonna play out? And like I said, in the past, we had some
I think it's a
problems with the planning commission, we brought them in closed session, and we said, these are our grievances with y'all. Is this what happened?
I mean, I've made my point about the benefit and the fairness of a due process provision, and I think it doesn't do violence to this draft. I think an appropriately worded, discrete size provision can be put in, and you can imagine an unfair future example of an employee who is angry at another employee and makes a false accusation, and it's credible, untrue, but credible, and then without the due process, the person who's been criticized or attacked has no opportunity,
Right.
except for,
Present their position.
without the language, that person who's been attacked would be relegated to informally trying to make that person's point to the board, wherever this, anyway, I've said it twice.
Well, from a staff perspective, we inherently have the grievance procedures set by the state.
But the wordsmithing could say, as otherwise provided or consistent with, or something.
And I think, to your point, I think that needs to be referenced. You know,
Well, we're working on the personnel policies, so we'll bring all that out, which
Okay.
maybe sometime in the past there was personnel policies that referenced agreements, but state code says if you don't have it, you use the state
well,
applies.
that's why the
Well,
a
we
year
had
ago,
one
I
last
brought
time
up
we-
an employee
Oh,
handbook.
that's happening.
All right,
Consistent with
so,
state code now.
but let's go back to this document. Change the subject, 'cause I think we've beaten this horse. All right, what about
Which one are you on, though?
paragraph H's and I? I'm using this one, the one that
I do the crosswalk. What is
Yeah.
what is it named?
is conflict of interest and gives some favors.
So
I
that's
think-
7 and 8.
Right here.
Oh,
It's the crosswalk to the
Okay.
non-codified
All right.
version.
so, I would suggest there be a reference to the COYA, because that gives a whole lot more detail. I think these words are good, but just to remind them,
And that's, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, other than
There's a general provision in there at the beginning that it should reflect all the state statutes without actually naming them. So
But-
that would be included by reference without specifically saying.
I understand, I just,
So
I'm thinking,
I would agree if it's not codified. I'm hesitant to put, and there could be an editor's note if it is codified that it links over to 15.2 whatever, or 2.2.
3100.
Well, see,
But I don't, if we codify and we put it into the code, then, every time the state code changes, they're
Well, you just
they're
put it as
recodified.
amended. You
As,
just-
it's just,
Yeah, as amended, and,
Yeah, not, because it,
Well, that's-
Virginia 1950 as amended.
yeah.
it's still wrong, and it just,
But you want
I'm
to keep
just- I'm
this
just
as
saying as-
succinct as you can for purposes of public.
take a look at C page. It says comply with the laws of, it doesn't limit, it's the laws of the United States,
Number 2.
Commonwealth, Virginia, County of Rappahannock.
That's,
It doesn't say
that's,
as amended or the current version of
Yeah.
all the.
let me restate my point.
what
Let me
he's
restate
saying
my
is that
point
when
is-
you get to the sections that are basically born out of COYA, well, there could be a link over to COYA basically to say, if you want to know more about this, go see COYA.
Right, exactly, because we, different hat.
Some people are policy wonks and they want to know all those.
RCCE ran training to help get that, and it was amazing how many people employees hadn't done it, okay? So, all I'm saying is, it's a hint to them to go check the law that they're underneath. That's all I'm trying to do, all right? Another one, K, I don't know which number that is.
Confidential information.
Confidential information.
10.
10. Question there is, how does that balance against FOIA? And again, I would say, the FOIA law, I would recommend a reference to that in the same manner, and then you haven't defined what confidential is. You know, in the federal government, we had a specific definition of what's confidential. What's defined what confidential is? All right, and if
I
you
think
look at
the
FOIA,
legal authorization would, FOIA could fall into that, but
yeah, but you know,
and if it's a record or just information, if it's hearsay, what I heard, I can tell you. I mean, that's not FOIA.
but the fear is that clause is used to stop an employee from answering a FOIA request in the sense that I label that confidential for whatever reason.
Nothing the board
I don't
puts-
know, you're
Well,
not
state
gonna.
laws
Nothing the
always
board
gonna
puts,
preempt
yeah.
this.
Yeah, we
Right,
can't put
you're
anything in
right.
our code.
You're not gonna change.
Well, then
state
what is
law, it's
how do the employees know what confidential is?
It's a good question.
Common sense, for one thing, any state statute,
Well, again, the reference, right?
if you need to, but if you,
Well, it
if you
says they
start
should
doing
comply with all-
everything, the
yeah.
thing becomes 15, 20 pages, and I think.
No, I'm just saying in
One of the
one
points is to
sentence.
keep it as, but
I mean, doesn't this overarching C cover all of this stuff?
Again, my point is, they need just a hint to go read the law themselves. That's all because they're required to, all right? But they haven't been doing it, all right?
So you mean notwithstanding the requirements of the Freedom
Or
of
you can say,
Information
Right.
Act?
shall comply with the laws of the United States, Commonwealth of Virginia, including FOIA and COIA?
However
That's
you
the way to
incorporate,
do it.
all I'm saying is there
You
should
just
be
put it in like
reference.
that, and then you,
There should be
as
references
opposed
to
to putting
those.
it in each
yeah,
little
it's not
individual
a
paragraph.
big issue, I guess,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Another one of my questions is N or 13, policy role of members. Members of the Board of Supervisors and all appointees and employees thereof shall not interfere with the administrative functions of the county or the professional duties of the county staff. We are the Board of Supervisors, not the Board of Rubber Stamp. That's some of the problems we got right now with this latest lawsuit, is that for a variety of reasons, the county didn't enforce its own code. And we've got a mess down there on 211. And one or two supervisors trying to encourage, staff that kept changing to get something accomplished has resulted in a mess down there. It looks slightly less than Banks Junkyard right now. I don't know if you're familiar with Sunny Banks. It's a mess. No longer in my district, but people in my district have to look across the road and see it. It's been going on for 2 years, so, unfortunately, members of the Board of Supervisors have to get involved. I don't think one member should be trying to influence an employee to do something. That's not right. But the board it has to be able to function as a board and take action.
Well, the functions of the board must be laid out in the code, right? The state, the code of the statute.
I wish it was that simple.
Yes.
I do. There's this old rule, it's called Dillon's Rule, and it applies to local governments, and it says that unless it's fairly implied or necessary, without statutory authorization from the General Assembly, you can't do it, meaning the local government. It's a restriction on the power of local government.
All those gun regulations were.
Well, there was all kinds of stuff. There was taxes for mules in one county and taxes for hogs in another, and this was a mess. This rule goes way back to about 1920, maybe before that, maybe the 1890s. And and it's really not from Virginia. Dillon's Rule actually is an import from Kentucky. Yeah, I think Kentucky or Missouri. But it's been engrafted into Virginia's law, so it's a settled law. So the answer is, though, there's no general provision or general code section that says this is what the Board of Supervisors is entitled to do. It becomes a tricky question sometimes as to whether or not it's necessary or fairly implied as a power. Let's say there's a grant of power to do a particular thing, then the county's saying, well, in order to do that, we have to issue license tags for our plates on our cars in order to enforce it. You know, then you're potentially in litigation over whether or not that was a necessary or fairly implied power to do that. So I don't mean to make it more complicated than it needs to be, because I think it's,
Well, all that goes way beyond the confines of what we're doing here.
we cannot in any way codify. See that big series of black books up there? There's a whole other 3 or 4 walls of them over in my office that are brown and gray. Those are the appellate court decisions. And so in order to do something like this, we can't just
Now, this
say,
is-
go read the entire body of law pertinent to local government in Virginia. So to make it workable, I think it is rather, it has to be rather
So
general.
to Ron's point is that he doesn't want this to imply that the board, you want to make sure the board can still reach in and influence staff action. And that, I'm not going to hand you big stiff arms to get out of my business.
As a board.
But ultimately, that sort of thing is worked out in our contract. And you agree and I agree that's how we're going to manage that relationship. And so I don't think anything here changes that. And we talked a lot about that sort of thing with, how much authority are you willing to give a staff person over certain matters when you have elected officials who are representing a community to make decisions. But at the same time, there are not enough hours in a day for you to do all the things that all your staff need to get done. And so you have that,
You delegate.
Yeah. So I don't know that anything here in 13 or N erodes your ability, but if your reading of that suggests that it may, then maybe the wording needs to change to clarify that it doesn't.
Well, we've got a,
Well, I also don't want it to erode, our
yes.
agreement that, or 15.2, whatever it is, 1541, that says, I'm supposed to do certain things, right? And there's an expectation that I'm going to do them without, having to have one of 5 board members come in and try to, pull levers, and I got this one pulling a lever that way, and that one pulling a lever that way, and then another one pulling it this way, and we can't get anything done.
certainly.
Well, forgive me, isn't it fair to say that when the board delegates, it does not surrender?
Oh, true.
The board continues to be the governing body of the county.
the majority voted.
The majority vote of the board is the governing body, is the governance of the
And
county.
in many cases, the sausage preparation, like is happening today, ultimately results in a vote of the board. And only then is a decision truly made. Well, there's a lot of input and influence early on that can affect that ultimate decision. In some cases, it doesn't come to an ultimate decision of the board. But,
The board is constituted as the governing body of the county.
right? Only certain decisions are clearly held to them, like ordinance changes and things like that.
Could you just put the word improperly before interfere?
Well, it's
Or some
subjective.
sort of, yeah, it's subjective, but you gotta know when you see it.
That's like observable that we were talking about. No observable.
I like it.
But there is, and this is in all seriousness, there is, particularly like with my job as the county attorney, there's an enormous amount of discretion because lawyers have to answer to even a higher authority. That's the ethics of our profession.
I would argue so do professional engineers.
And so professional engineers, indeed they do. And so there's oftentimes a question will come like in the enforcement of something, is it right for filing suit? Is it proper to go forward with the filing of a lawsuit at this time? Can I ethically and reasonably recommend a certain course of action to be taken by the board? So to have a situation where you've got a fractured board and there may be some members who are wanting this particular course of action to go and then the others not. So at some point that decision has to be made and ultimately it's going to come down to the individual functionary to do that. I mean, this was a debate in the Federalist Papers, right? Are we a society virtuous manner, or are we gonna codify everything and kind of have a sort of a connected dot approach to government? So at some point, there is a level of discretion that's entrusted to the employees of the county to do their jobs. And I think that's what this is driving at, is to prevent a political faction of the board from making life untenable for the staff. And, but no, in answer to your question, it's certainly true that the board is the power in the county, but it's only by its majority vote that it acts. So, you know, what can happen is that, you know, you get a pet project of one member who's pushing for it to happen, and the other members may or may not concur in that. And so now you got an employee who's stuck in a fight. He's in a fight, you know, he's getting squeezed from both sides of it. So I think that's what that aspires to say. It doesn't say it exactly well.
So can we flip it backwards right now? It says shall not interfere with,
Yes,
right? Could you
well-
change it to be shall support the administrative functions of the county or, and professional duties of county staff?
Well, this particular one, policy role of members, is less than half of what Madison has in the same place. Madison says policy role of members. The Board of Supervisors determines the policies of the county with the advice, information, and analysis provided by the public, boards, commissions, and committees, and county staff. The Board of Supervisors delegates authority for the administration of the county to the county administrator with the advice and consent of the board. Why did we chop off 2/3 of that?
Don't know. You can use that.
I have a problem with that. Yeah, it sounds good to me.
I mean, that's,
That may have come from another one, I don't know exactly.
we're
Yeah,
using.
I think that's very clarifying.
We start in the middle of a paragraph, therefore shall not interfere. That's basically where we start, members of the board and all appointees shall not interfere. If we have the entire statement here, it more than satisfies my,
No, that's
my
not,
issues with
I
it.
didn't have a problem with the way Madison approached that. So, in fact, I didn't have a problem with the way some of the others read with regard to that as well, the ones that I found. But if the Madison version is good, that's fine. I just stick that back in there.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is it particular
It's
section?
14 on their code of ethics for 2018.
Yeah, maybe 2017 was different. That's where this came from. Who knows?
14 could be.
What is it, 14?
14
Yeah.
on Madison's. Ours is 14 as well, but it's
Truncated.
13.
If you're done with that one, I got another point that you may want to consider. Under contact of members, I'm not going to give the letter anymore.
Conduct of members.
Did you need to make a call?
No, go ahead.
I gotta go. Sorry, gentlemen, thank you.
you.
Appreciate the opportunity for input. Have a seat. I gotta go to another meeting. Good to see you. Got a warrant for you.
Under conduct of members, you need to address, I think you need to address workplace environment, such as, the standard harassment clauses.
Yeah, and I would suggest that now you're digging into personnel policy matters that would be better in personnel policy.
Maybe, maybe not. But
What are you looking for?
for example, what if this is going out, what if someone does sexual harassment?
You know, and that'll certainly be front and center in our personnel policy.
I understand you do that, but this is conduct going out to all the employees that directly. I'm not saying to lay it out in detail. I'm just saying that to mention it as workplace environment. And I didn't want to leave.
Where are we on the policy?
It's in your draft that Lauren has gathered documents from all over the place, from VML, so we'll need to the board probably.
That's why I call the workforce,
We'll be working with you too.
just something that, that would key to the policy, just something like, shall not the workforce environment. Just a simple little line in there that just adds that gives the authority over
It
that.
needs to be high level, because there are any number of things that you start getting prescriptive, and then you're leaving stuff out. And I don't know.
Yeah, then you end up using this phrase, including but not limited to, over and over again, that litany of,
What,
it's
shall conform to the county's personnel policies.
Well, it already says that. I mean, it doesn't say that specifically, but it says it conforms to all of the other ordinances of the county and all state statutes.
I really,
Shy on the personnel policy.
Laws of the county.
I think a general thing about workforce environment is workplace environment, excuse me.
We still don't have
That's just a-
timekeeping.
I don't want to call it specific ones under that, but just workplace environment. Just a very general.
I mean, you can always say,
Contact,
in
personal-
aspirational style language, you can always say that all those affected hereby or governed by shall always strive to maintain a
Harassment-free work.
healthy and productive.
So does that not fall under abusive conduct, personal charges, or verbal attacks?
You can
It's
put it.
not-
I don't.
Does that fall within that? I mean, is there a,
You could add another word or two.
to that?
Yeah.
Shall strive to foster a healthy, productive work environment, something along those lines.
All I'm saying is all the employee handbooks I've had have had very detailed stuff on that. All right?
Yeah,
And I'm
this
just saying.
isn't it, though,
I know
right?
that isn't it, but I'm saying this to me is looking like, an overarching thing to the employee handbook. This is the general, what do you call it? Preface or because the authorities in the employee handbook are going to come out of this document, right?
It's either going to be approved by the board or approved by me with authorization from the board, so it would independently carry its own weight. But we wouldn't want it to conflict with this
Well,
or anything
right.
else.
Art with catch line on D, conduct of members, we might want to just delete of members, because the paragraph defines members, appointees.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, another question, I guess.
Yeah, that sentence was confusing.
Why did, we left out decisions based on merit? Number 6, we went to communication, that's how we got out of line with Madison. Madison's number 6 is decisions based on merit. Members shall base their decisions on the merits and substance of the matter at hand and apply laws and ordinances rather than unrelated considerations. Which we've been accused of that a lot. I just wonder why that got left out. That's how we got it out of sync with Madison's. Is there a reason that wasn't put in?
I don't know if we took that out or you took that
I
out,
didn't
or
take
if
it out.
it was in there in the first place.
Yeah, I didn't take that out.
We used a number of different ones, so we didn't want to.
The source for this was multiple counties in Virginia.
Yeah, you guys kind of amalgamated several.
Probably half a dozen Virginia counties.
There's nothing that actually forces the board to maintain that, but I think it's a very lofty goal. We probably ought to have that in our somewhere. Decisions based on merit and information.
Doesn't mean it's gonna happen.
Well,
One of the
it means the
first-
chairman can take a
Tell a
enforcement action.
politician to-
For instance, with zoning, and I've had this discussion with Gary, one of the very first classes I took with Mike Chandler, he told us a couple of things that we needed to try and remember, because he was on the town council in Blacksburg, and he said he hated it when he'd get into a meeting and fellow members would start tearing their envelopes open. They hadn't looked at the package prior to the meeting. He said, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't remember anything else I say here today, please, as soon as you get your package, just rip it open, so that you're not doing it at the meeting. Just rip it open. If you're not gonna look at it, just take, 2 seconds and rip it open, and then when you come into the meeting, your package is already open. It looks better.
Now we have to check the cookies on your computer.
Yeah,
If I can get political, I'll quote Nancy Pelosi, you have to pass a lot before you
yeah,
consider it.
yeah. Well, that's basically what we were trying to do here a couple of times.
Which is
too.
absolutely true, right? I mean, by definition, it's not a law
When
till
you
it's
get
passed, right?
2,400
That's what
page.
they did.
We bought two army
what they
trucks, nobody looked at the invoices.
So is there some recommendation from the rules committee
Well,
relative to this number 6 from Madison?
I'd
Decision
like to
based
see
on merit?
something like in there. I don't care if you wanna, change the numeration to match theirs, if you wanna put it toward the end of something. But I think it, it's a
That
lofty
was Madison's
goal.
number 6. Okay.
Decisions based on merit and information.
Lofty goal, we could do it.
Last question I had is, what's the rationale of an ordinance versus just a policy? I'm just wondering what the,
Well, ordinance becomes the codified law.
that's what I'm wondering.
And when you talk about an ordinance, it's generally gonna be published in the code. Now, more or less non-sweeping things, like we're gonna resolve to call Saturdays Butterball Turkey Day or something, doesn't need to be part of the code of Rappahannock. You're still a resolution, it has the force of law, but, it's only spread upon the minutes.
Yeah, so part of the discussion at the last meeting was that you make a policy, and it just may get lost in time in a minute book, whereas if it's codified,
Our grievance
it's
procedure.
there, right? And it's
Okay,
not gonna get lost.
I
That's
just
the
was
big
wondering,
difference.
that's the next one, sorry I wasn't
And
here.
so
last time.
what Gloucester does with their code of conduct is they adopt it every year at their